Okay, hello English literature students. Sorry this has taken me a little while to make for you, but I have made it now. This is some advice on answering exam questions, excuse me, on the first section of paper 3, the modern poetry questions. Please also watch the video that there is a link to in the revision booklet where the chief examiner talks about what he's looking for, because I guess what he says trumps what I say. Okay, just to let you see how the question will appear in the exam paper. There is the exam paper itself with the questions and where you write, and there's also a source booklet. So although you can bring your poetry book into the exam, you won't need it. Your forward anthology poems will both be printed in the source booklet. So it will direct you to the page, read the poem on page whatever of the source booklet, begin your answer on page blah. Okay, so read the poem, and this is the unseen poem, this example, Somewhat Unravelled by Jo Shapcott, and it tells you which page it's in, and reread On Her Blindness, and that poem would actually be in the source booklet as well, so you don't have to open your poetry book anymore. And remember, there's only one unseen poem, but there is a choice of 2 questions. And I'm going to explain how I would suggest you choose which one to do. Okay, and you can see there the theme. So one of them's got effects of growing old, one of them's got expressing strong emotions. So the first thing you will do is choose what you're going to write about and do some planning. The unseen poem and both the set poems appear in a separate source booklet. So what I would recommend you do is you read the unseen poem with both questions in mind. So in this case, you're thinking, do I want to write about growing old, or do I want to write about expressing strong emotions? If this is the unseen poem, yeah, and I think that's got to be one of the key things that helps you decide which question to answer. But you may also want to choose based on which set poem you feel strongest on. So it's a weighing up of all these things. How well can you answer that question on the unseen poem? Which of the set poems would you like to answer? Which of the questions do you like? However, don't take too long. Okay, you've got roughly 65 minutes to answer this question, and then of course the Rossetti question. So in those, let's say 15 minutes, you choose which one you're going to do, and then you annotate. And because you've got the poems in front of you, you can annotate both poems. You can annotate the unseen poem and the set poem. It would be a very good idea to write the theme at the top. So once you've decided what your STEM question is, extreme emotions, growing old, if you write that at the top of both poems, then you will only be annotating for that theme. And from those annotations, you create a plan, okay? The plan will not be marked, but the exam board are very keen. They always say this: good answers have a plan, and it's evident they have a plan before you start writing. I would suggest 2 columns, or however you wish to do it. Key points of similarity and difference in how the theme is explored. So I've said there in bold, 10 to 15 minutes reading, annotating, and planning. Okay. And then you've got to start writing your answer. So you've got roughly 50 minutes to write your answer. But now you've got a plan that you can use to structure your paragraphs. You need to discuss both poems equally. Okay, it may be tempting to say more about the set poem because you could revise it, but they do want both poems equally. You can bring in the contexts for the set poems where relevant to interpretation. Okay, so context is assessed on this. Because that can help you boost your view of the poem, because it's not just your interpretation, you know something about the context as well. You should know the set poem confidently, so let that lead your answer and your points of comparison. Your interpretations, remember this, they do really want your interpretations, but please try and present them tentatively. It could mean this, it may suggest this, it seems to be this, and you can be confident if it's supported by more than one piece of evidence in the poem. Okay, the poem's got a jaunty tone, but you want to say it's all about death. Yeah, so just think, am I reading just one thing too much? Look for evidence throughout the poem for an interpretation. Okay, do write an introduction. And this is, remember, we've practiced this quite a lot, the overview of both poems. Yeah, so this is where you talk about the content and the meaning and what they're about. You don't need to prove it yet, but you do need to overview both poems and only what they are doing with the theme specified in the question. So this poem talks about aging in these ways. This poem explores aging in this way. Yeah, that's all you need to do. It's much better to focus on big issues in the introduction, the content, the meanings. If you want to talk about any techniques, form, you could bring in at this point. This is a lyric poem, this is a sonnet, this is, yeah, or the tone. This poem seems to be quite happy, this poem seems to be quite doom-laden. Okay, but don't in your introduction talk about a simile. Don't talk about enjambment. Yeah, those are tiny things that you save for analysis. And we were talking about this. Is it good to use first person? Well, actually, the assessment objective 1 asks for a personal response. So, you know, if they're asking for a personal response, there's no bad harm in it. Okay, so then to think about paragraphs. I'm going to talk about how to write a paragraph starting with similarities, but you can write paragraphs starting with differences. But I think similarities are a good place to start because, well, anyway. Okay. So start from a point of similarity, focus on the question. Both poems explore strong emotions, but this one's about this one. So support that with evidence. In this poem, strong emotion is evident through this, this, and this. When I say evidence, it doesn't always have to be a quotation. Yeah, remember that. You could talk about form, you could talk about structure. I don't know why it says point on that slide there. Oh, I see. It could be a form or a structure point. Yes, it could be a point about form or structure. Okay, so this is my evidence. Name what your evidence is. Do you see what I mean? Bring in your poetic technique terms there. Yeah, so before you quote it or just after you quote it, name a techniquey thing. So this poem chooses to explore strong emotions through using the sonnet form. Yeah, there we go, sonnet form. You've named the techniques. Then analyze the effect of the method and techniques used. So this is where you are exploring meaning. So sonnet form is highly structured, which has an interesting effect on the expression of strong emotion. I'm just completely making this up, because it controls what is otherwise very powerful. Okay, analysis should lead to bringing out the differences in approach or attitude. So I say that about the one poem, and then I turn to the next, and I say this poem, however, uses free verse. Yeah? And I conclude my paragraph with differences. Okay, so after marking your first essays, I think this is a top tip. Start with the similarity, but end with why the differences are there. So this one does it this way, but this one does it this way. And if you want to think about why those differences are there, that's where you could bring in contexts. You can bring in context to help you interpret, but context could also explain why the differences are there. Okay, you can start a paragraph with a difference. Okay, I noticed one of the questions was asked about, you know, how do these poems think about some things like birth or death? And if one's poem's about birth and one poem's about death, then you're going to have some big differences, aren't you? So you can start with a key difference, but just make sure you're still focusing on the theme in the question. Try to make it a big thing. I'm going to talk a bit more about this in class, about big things and small things. Yeah, I know those are rather vague terms, but it is worth thinking about poetic technique in terms of the big things and then the small things. Form is a big thing, enjambment is a small thing. Tone of voice is a big thing, diction is a small thing. And then discuss why it's different, and this may be linking to the poem's overall meaning and content, but you could also bring in contexts that could explain the difference as well. Conclusion. This is where you do a second overview. but you're not just overviewing the poems now, you're also overviewing your answer. Okay, and this is where you need to sound super confident. Yeah, just say, these are the big differences, and this is why they're there. Do not introduce new quotes, evidence, or examples in your conclusion. Now, I don't think you're going to lose any marks from saying in conclusion, but if you notice you've done it, cross it out. I promise you what you will have written after in conclusion will be fine, and you don't need to say in conclusion. But that may be just me. The examiners don't seem to mind. Return to the key terms in the question, yeah, or the synonyms for them which you have used. And the key thing in the conclusion is to make confident points about the key differences. Similarities are less important and less interesting. Okay, now these are big overview points. It may be that there is a really key similarity that you do want to mention. It could be fine, okay, but generally speaking, differences allow you to say more, because that's the point of comparison, isn't it? So just to give you a quick look at what the assessment objectives are and how I think you could make sure you're doing them. The number one is about writing your essay. So your answer should be a personal response, but should also be informed. Okay, so that's a nice balancing act. It's personal, but it's got to be informed. So you can't just say, because I think this, yeah, you've got to have evidence for it, but they do want a personal response. Concepts and terminology, really important. Coherent, accurate written expression is really important. Please think about apostrophes. I may do an apostrophe class or a little apostrophe PowerPoint, because I know apostrophes are a killer for quite a lot of people. So how to do it? Use poetic terminology. And a good thing to do about that is, before you introduce your example, name what it's going to be. Or if you forget to do it before, say it afterwards, before going on to your analysis. So there's always a little moment before or after your evidence where that naming of the technique should pop in. It's worth looking back over essays and seeing where you perhaps have missed the opportunity to put in that knowledge and understanding. Structure your answer clearly. Well, I've just been through how to do that, so hopefully that's fine. Planning is how you make a good structure. It's much harder to structure as you're going along. And do explore your own response. And explore means being tentative and saying it might be this, it might be the other. That's fine. Yeah, they know you've only just seen this poem, certainly the unseen one. Analysing the ways in which meanings are shaped in poetry. Okay, so this is when you're saying, this is what it's about, this is how I interpret it. So where this happens is between giving the example and saying what it means. There's a gap there. How does it mean that? Yeah. Now, with the set poems, you should be fairly confident describing that, because we have talked about that. With the unseen poem, you know, that's where it's a bit more have a go, and you know, just look for, how does this image create this meaning? I always bang on about this when you're talking about metaphors and similes. Yeah, don't just go, oh, it's compared to this and this does this. Why is it compared to that? Why is the image effective for the thing that's being described? I'm sorry, this is so abstract, isn't it? Let's think of an example off the top of my head. It's going to be brilliant, isn't it? So I'm trying to think of one of the poems we've studied. Oh yes, in When 6 O'Clock Comes, the baby is described as his head lolling like a drunk's. Okay, why does the mother describe the baby's head lolling like a drunk's? What is the similarity between the baby and the drunk? Now, if you read that too simplistically, you know, you could get something mad about the baby being like a drunk and the mother's scared of it. Oh, yeah, don't do that. It's literally exactly the same movement. So it's a really evocative image to help people picture that, maybe who don't have babies. It's a little bit humorous, I would say. Yeah, so when you've got an image, think about what exactly is being compared to exactly what, and that will get you to meaning and effect. Contexts, okay, revise the relevant context for the anthology poems. Yeah, you should be nice and confident with that. But for unseen poems, you've got to be a bit more informed generally. Just think about what we know about modern poetry, what we know about the modern world. So you can link it into the world we live in. Could be linked to the identity of the poet. Sometimes that's fairly obvious. You could guess someone's gender. You might be able to guess someone's ethnicity or nationality from their name. Take care, but it could be possible. But yeah, they're all modern poems, so we should be able to situate them in the modern world. And context could explain differences. Yeah, so context could be brought in to explain differences, not just in your conclusions, but at the conclusions of your paragraphs as well. And obviously you should be comparing all the way through for AO4, but particularly you can bring those out in your introduction and in your conclusion, particularly in your conclusion. That's where you do the overview of the differences, but also in the openings and the closings of the paragraphs. If you think about it, the opening is where you talk about both, the closing is where you talk about both. Actually, within the paragraph, you'll talk about one and then the other. Okay, so I hope that's helpful. I'm just going to make a note to make you a thing about apostrophes. Okay. Thank you and goodbye.